Hi, this is Marty Hahn for Discover the Word. I hope you'll join us to talk about Elisha, an interesting man who tells us a lot about our God and ourselves.
Give us this day our daily bread. Now, those are Jesus' familiar words from the Lord's Prayer. And in reality, they're words that are about more than just food, just our literal daily bread, right? It's more about provision and recognizing that it's God who provides all we need. Well, that is a common message in the Bible. And to begin this edition of the Discover the Word podcast, we're going to take note of how often food is used to demonstrate how God really is our provider. And it's an interesting event in the miraculous life of Elisha that we'll be exploring together. Can we trust God to provide what we need? And can we trust that what God provides is what we need? We'll pull a chair up. We'll start another hour of studying the Bible together on Discover the Word next. And it is great to have you here at the table with us as we get the Discover the Word group together. Discover the Word is Bible engagement in the form of a group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And the subject of this first part of our conversation about Elisha's miraculous life is really built right into the name of our ministry. God has been providing for us here at Our Daily Bread Ministries for close to 90 years as we continue to, as our mission states, make the life-changing story and wisdom of the Bible accessible and understandable to people all around the world. And right now, in our weekly Bible study podcast, three members of our Discover the Word group, Marty Hahn and Elisa Morgan and Bill Crowder, are working through a 7-part series about the miraculous life of Elisha and some of the events recorded in the Old Testament book of 2 Kings. And so, as we begin part 4, we're going to run into another of those food stories that are in the Bible that, as we'll discover, ends up being about a lot more than just food. All right, and so let's listen as Mart leads Elisa and Bill in this conversation about a poisoned pot of stew and how through Elisha, God miraculously provides for a group of his people. And how the food got poisoned reminds Mart of why he's hesitant to do something that I'm sure some of you like to do.
Do either of you like to hunt mushrooms in the spring?
No.
You don't?
No.
I don't even like to hunt mushrooms at the grocery store.
You don't?
That's good.
Do you have any friends that do? Not so much, huh?
Not so much.
Okay.
No, and I'm not sure how much they grow in my area of the world either. In
Okay,
the spring,
you got to be
for
out in the
sure.
woods, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the only mushrooms I see are in our yard, and they come from too much rain, and I don't think you're supposed to eat them.
One of our coworkers here, he and his family love to get out in the woods and hunt mushrooms in the spring, and it's like it happens within a short period of time. And I'm thinking, I can't believe you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many stories of people who've gotten sick thinking they're
that's
picking, edible. It's interesting. I got on a website and I was just trying to figure out, okay, now what's the difference between edible and not edible? And what I found out is there's a lot of myths about what's safe. I think the answer for me is just don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't go there. Okay, well, the reason I wanted to talk about it is because we've been looking at the miraculous life of Elisha. Here's somebody who follows Elijah, who is known as the man of the mountain, the man who calls fire down from heaven. But his successor, Elisha, really is an amazing person. And we've talked about this in the past. The people of the land, God's people, had followed after the gods of the region. So the north especially had become very idolatrous. We know that God was judging the land. And one of the judgments, really it was a loving judgment, though, tried to bring the people to their senses, to get them to wake up. One of the judgments was famine. And even reading from part of the narrative of Elisha, it sounds like it's just an exceedingly difficult thing to face. I mean, even in the text, we'll be looking at it in some other conversations, talk about people who literally cannibalize their own dead children because the children are weak and they don't survive. I mean, it's hard to even talk about.
Yeah.
But it's an extremely difficult time for a people, for a nation. So the text that we're looking at now and the miracle that occurs within that text is something that I think is really worth thinking about. It's found in 2 Kings chapter 4, and this is kind of a short text. Let's read it, and at least I wish you would just read chapter 4, verses 38 through 41, and this is going to occur during that time of famine.
Okay. Elisha now returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land. One day, as the group of prophets was seated before him, he said to his servant, "Put a large pot on the fire and make some stew for the rest of the group."
Let me just stop you there just for a minute, Bill. When he talks about the group of prophets, what's the background of that?
Well, there apparently was a school of the prophets that had been connected to Elijah, and Elisha had some association with them as well, and especially as the transition happens from Elijah to Elisha, we see this school of the prophets almost like a training ground for people in ministry, really step into the forefront and have a role in some of the early stories in Elisha's life.
Right. Sometimes they're called the sons of the prophets, and Elisha appears to have taken over. He's mentoring now this group, so okay.
That's helpful. One of the young men went out into the field to gather herbs and came back with a pocket full of wild gourds. He shredded them and put them into the pot without realizing they were poisonous. Some of the stew was served to the men, but after they had eaten a bite or two, they cried out, "Man of God, there's poison in this stew," so they would not eat it. Elisha said, "Bring me some flour," and he threw it into the pot and said, "Now it's all right, go ahead and eat." And then it did not harm them.
Interesting, huh?
It's kind of like the earlier miracle we saw in a previous conversation of the poisoned well, and he said throw a little salt in it, and it'll make it clean. It's similar to that. Who says throw salt in water to make it better?
Yeah.
Who says throwing flour in poison is going to... It's just an odd thing.
Yeah, but when it came to that purifying the water with a little salt, remember that? It has echoes of the miracle that happened when Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea, and then the first event, they came to some bitter water.
Yeah, poisoned water,
Yeah,
Mara.
so he threw a branch, But the whole idea is that God was protecting the people in a difficult place and in a difficult time. And without God's miracle, they wouldn't have had water. And in this case, without a miracle, they wouldn't have had food. So it's a difficult time. It's a time of famine. And yet the question is, how does this make the record? I mean, how does it show up? It just seems strange.
It does. Do you think the point is the flour, or is the point the gourds, or is the point more what you were alluding to as we looked at other stories, God's presence, God's provision? Because we get all kind of mumbo jumbo like this is a special spell.
Right.
Is that the point? The ingredients?
There must be. No, it can't be that, can it?
Yeah.
think
Because
so.
then it does start to sound very superstitious.
Yeah.
Maybe thinking at it from a different angle, is it because here we have a very ordinary, everyday life situation in hard times, and even in the ordinary, everyday life, God's still showing up. It's not just at the super big events, it's at the everyday events too.
Okay.
Yeah, I think once we put it in context, it means so much. Okay, the context again is what? Why is there a famine?
Judgment.
Judgment on the people.
And these are people who are being trained. These are
Right.
prophets in training.
Right.
So they need to understand who God is and his provision.
And who are prophets in training? I mean, they're the Lord's people, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And leaders, the
Right.
Lord's potential
Yeah,
leaders.
leaders,
Right.
future leaders. Yeah.
So in the context of a famine, they go out in the field, they're trying to do what they can. One of the guys picks a gourd that he doesn't know is poisonous, and so they're threatened. They call out, "Man of God." It's funny, isn't it? It's a funny phrase. "Man of God, there's poison in the stew."
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter what he does, whether he throws in a little bit of water or flour or whatever. Ultimately, this is a picture of a miracle that God is protecting and providing for his people. How significant is that?
Well, it's an ongoing revelation of God to his people, if you think about it. I mean, you see God providing food.
Right.
You know, we think about manna to the Israelites in the desert. We think all the way to Jesus' ministry and the reproduction of food so that people could eat, the multiplying of loaves and fishes.
Right. I think you're right. There's a simplicity here. God provides for his people.
Give us our daily bread.
Give us our daily bread. And Jesus would say to the people, why do you worry about...
What you're going to eat or what you're going to wear.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that they would worry about it is because they didn't have Walmart or super grocery stores. I mean, they were an agricultural economy. Their meal today depended on what they grew this season.
That's right.
Right.
And so there's a very literal hand-to-mouth kind
We
of
really don't
Exactly.
understand that.
Exactly.
really.
But Elisa, you're taking us to the New Testament. Let's go to Matthew chapter 16.
Okay.
Because I think there is a connection here because it's one story and you expect the parts to fit together. It's going someplace. In Matthew chapter 16, if we go to verse 5, what have we got there?
This is the story where Jesus is talking about the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
But what about the poison?
Yeah, that's a good
What's
point.
he warning about?
He's warning that their teaching is basically the poison in the stew.
Right.
The
Yeah.
Pharisees
The
and
yeast.
Sadducees.
Yeah.
Read it once.
Okay. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Verse 7, they decided he was saying this because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were thinking, so he said, "You have so little faith. Why are you worried about having no food? Won't you ever understand? Don't you remember the 5,000 I fed with 5 loaves and the baskets of food that were left over? Don't you remember the 4,000 I fed with 7 loaves with baskets of food left over? How could you even think I was talking about food?"
Okay. There's a connection here, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think we're right onto something here when we say Jesus warns them about the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, what would that be referring to?
It's really like a dependence on the law and a conservative interpretation of the law. The law is going to kill you rather than free you.
Right, and it's deceptive. It was basically a distraction from the true life of God.
Takes them down the wrong path.
Takes them down the wrong path. And Jesus said, this will mess your bread up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is dangerous.
Yeah.
So really, if we put it in the big context, in Elisha's day and in the day of Jesus, it's the story of God. The story of one God, the creator of the earth, who now is coming to his people to rescue them, to lead them, to teach them, to give them life, to give them hope, to teach them to love one another. It's a story of one God, story of a God who can provide for us in the desperate times of our lives. And his people who trust him know that he's a provider, he's a protector. Now, that doesn't mean that we know exactly how he's going to do it in all of our circumstances, but we know he is the protector, he is the provider, and he's the one who can give us bread, our daily bread, and at the same time give us something that is not toxic, something that is for our good. And each of us has to apply that in the individual circumstances of our lives.
So really throughout Scripture, we see a God who presents himself in our daily moments and provides. It's not neat and tidy, and there's going to be famines, there are going to be situations that are, like you said, Mart, desperate. But we see a God who steps into them and provides in our daily to give us what we need.
Right. In the person of Jesus, this God of the Old Testament becomes so personal, and we find so much encouragement, so much hope that he's able to provide for us.
Yeah, God provides. An important lesson that we learn from this event in the miraculous life of Elisha, where the pot of poisonous stew is fixed or healed during this time of famine. All right, well, next we're going to look at another food miracle in Elisha's life, and in the process see an amazingly similar event in the miraculous life of Jesus. In fact, it's the only miracle of Jesus, other than the resurrection, of course, that's recorded in all 4 gospel accounts of his life. And so, which miracle of Jesus is it that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all include that seems to have a link to an episode in the miraculous life of Elisha? Well, that's what we'll discover in this next segment.
Let's start with a very basic question. If we say that something has a story, what do we mean?
That maybe there's more to what we see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in which direction?
I think backwards.
Well, I
Yeah.
think both directions. It's just
Yeah.
we don't know what the remaining story is going to be yet. So the story really has come and is yet coming.
Right.
But if you think about a person who comes in really grouchy to work one day, and it's not so much about what's ahead. It's like
Yeah.
what happened on the way to work or
Right.
what happened at home before they left that makes them in a bad
Right.
mood.
Or it may be that they've got a doctor's appointment later that day and they
Very
don't know
good.
what's going to come out of it, and they're grouchy because they're full of
They're
anxiety
worried.
about that.
That's great, Bill.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a story. There's
Okay.
a story that we don't know about.
Right. And then if we say, okay, and so what is the anatomy of a story? What are the pieces and parts of a story?
Let's see. I remember learning this in English. It's like characters, conflict, resolution.
Okay.
Is that kind of
That's
basic
good.
points?
Yeah.
Or to say it easier, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Past, present, and future.
Right. Okay, we've been talking about the miracles of Elisha. We know that he came from someplace. We know that he had a relationship with Elijah before him. We know that throughout the bigger story of the Bible, within the bigger plot and the unfolding drama, that Elijah, who preceded him, has an enormous role throughout the Old and New Testaments, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would we say Elijah's role is in terms of the bigger story of the Bible?
Wow.
Well, Elijah becomes a symbolic figure of the one who prepares the way. And so the book of Malachi would later say that before Messiah or the deliverer comes, Elijah's going to come and prepare
Right.
the way. And then, of course, we see that visualized in the New Testament through John the Baptist.
Right. Now, in the New Testament, does Elijah show up very much?
His name shows up quite
Yeah.
a few times.
Think about the Transfiguration.
Yeah, where he actually shows up.
Right. And
With
in a lot
Moses.
of conversations with Jesus, they're asking, the question, are you Elijah?
Yeah.
Who does he say Elijah really is?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. He said, if you can accept this,
Which is so confusing.
yeah, until we can look back and see how it all fits together. But Elijah is mentioned about 30 times
Really?
in the New Testament.
My.
In some of our Bibles, it's a little difficult to recognize it because it shows up as Elias, Elias. But
Which is just a misspelling of
Yeah, right.
Elisa. Sorry.
okay, but when we think, but when we think then in terms of his successor, Elisha, we find extensive commentary on him in the Old Covenant. But when we get to the New Testament, how often does he show up?
I don't think
Once.
he does.
Yeah,
Once?
one
Where is
time.
One
it?
time, Luke chapter 4.
Yeah.
But it's in conjunction with a mention of Elijah.
Yeah, exactly, right. But the first point to make is that Elijah and Elisha are a part of a bigger story. They have a past. They're rooted in the revelation of this God of creation, who then becomes the God of Abraham, who becomes the God of the people of Israel, who are set apart by God as like a showcase, like an example, not just for themselves, but for the whole world. And yet this people, like all of us, along the way, they got distracted, they wandered from him, they got into all kinds of trouble because they've stopped trusting the God of their fathers and mothers. So this is the context. Now, the bad situation that they're in 2 Kings chapter 4, where we are, is there's a famine in the land. And in the last conversation, we talked about a miracle, the first miracle that happened directly related to the famine. You remember what it was? Just,
It was about this pot of stew that was poisoned, and then Elisha made it edible.
yeah.
By
Okay.
throwing flour in it.
Right. And yesterday we talked about some of the bigger significance of what that was all about. Let's dive into this one now. The second famine miracle, it's in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 42 through 44. And Bill, would you read those for us?
2 Kings 4, verse 42. One day a man of Baal Shalisha brought the man of God a sack of fresh grain and 20 loaves of barley bread made from the first grain of his harvest. Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat." "What?" his servant exclaimed. "Feed 100 people with only this?" But Elisha repeated, "Give it to the people so they can eat. For this is what the Lord says, everyone will eat, and there will even be some left over." And when they gave it to the people, there was plenty for all and some left over, just as the Lord had promised.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Sounds super familiar.
Yeah.
What does it sound like?
Jesus feeding the 5,000.
Yeah. Let's pick it apart a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
look at it. Okay, so a man from Baal Shalisha. It's interesting. That was a city that was important in their day. It was north of Jerusalem, in the center of Israel.
Okay.
And the Jewish Talmud says it was a region, a location where the harvest first came in the spring. And we know from Scripture that one of the first harvests of Israel was the barley harvest. And it's interesting because there are three major pilgrim festivals or celebrations, holy festivals in Israel. The first was Passover in the spring, in the March-April period. And the first fruits of barley were brought to the temple at that point. 50 days later, you have Pentecost, and that's when the wheat harvest was coming in. And then the fall festivals, that was really when the grape harvest came in. But it's this barley, it's the first harvest in the springtime. And we're told here in this text that a man from Baal Shalisha brings some barley loaves to Elisha.
Now, is there a significance to the fact that they're in a famine, but they are getting a crop?
They are getting something, right?
And so there's something which is more than nothing, but
Right.
apparently the famine is because whatever they had, it wasn't enough.
Right. So there's something that is brought to them, these barley loaves. And they say, how in the world are we going to feed 100 men? So apparently there were 100 students of Elisha, sons of the prophets who were there.
I don't want to derail us, but I'm stuck on the 20 loaves. Because when I was thinking of Jesus feeding the 5,000, he had like 5 loaves.
Yeah.
And that was for 5,000. And I'm a little literal here, so maybe that's not the point. But 20 loaves for 100 people doesn't really seem like that small. It's 5 people per loaf.
Yeah.
That's doable.
It's doable
You know.
for one meal, but what do you do after
Okay.
that?
So there's this implication that it's ongoing feeding,
Right.
maybe?
What we do have here, though, is that the barley harvest has come in. So it's around the time of Passover.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And the man of God takes what is not enough, and by the power of the one true God, makes it to be enough.
Yeah.
But you're right. We keep jumping ahead, don't we, to the New Testament, because it seems like, well, this is the same story.
Seems like
I
it.
mean, we take the story apart, and this is the same God who's revealing himself to his old covenant people who will, in the New Testament, personally arrive on the scene in the person of Jesus. Let's go ahead and jump to the New Testament, just because of the similarities. The echo is so strong.
It is, isn't it?
And the name Elisha and the name Jesus mean the same thing. God is our Savior. God is our Savior, multiplying bread, and then you have God is our Savior,
Multiplying bread. Even more bread.
That's
okay.
true. It's not a stretch. Let's go to John chapter 6. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 14, because this is really an important passage, especially in helping us to see where this story of Elijah and Elisha and the God of the Old Testament who's calling his people back to himself, where it's going, okay? And, you know, it's funny. Elisa, E-L-I. People ever talk about it?
Oh, my New Testament professor always called me Elisha, which
He did.
it tickled me to death. I was like, and I would answer because he'd get confused if I
Okay,
didn't.
why don't you and Bill together read through...
So Elisha and Bill, here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, John 6:1.
1 through 14, okay?
Okay.
Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. We've just talked about that.
So it's during the time of Passover. So this would be the time of the barley harvest.
Yeah,
okay?
the same timing
Same
as in
time,
the Elisha
Same
miracle.
time, right. It's just in it's near Passover.
When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do.
Philip replied, "It would take a small fortune to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd?" "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus ordered. So all of them, the men alone numbered 5,000, sat down on the grassy slopes. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and passed them out to the people. Afterwards he did the same with the fish, and they all ate until they were full.
When they had had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world."
Okay. So what we're seeing here is that there's a story. It's a big story. There's a flow. And it's all about the one true God who in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament times, was working with a nation. According to the unfolding of this drama, that God becomes a person, a human in Jesus, and then he begins to do the same thing that the God of the Old Testament was doing, assuring his people, you've got reason to trust me. I'm your provider. I'm your protector. I'm your Savior, he ends up showing those people. And really today, this is the same God that you and I are living with. And the challenge to us is, will we trust him for something as simple as our daily bread?
Yeah, I think conversations like that are some of my favorites when we see the big story that the Bible is telling. From Genesis to Revelation, it's a story of rescue and redemption and provision and how God proves himself faithful time and time again. Well, this is Discover the Word Bible Engagement for Life from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And you're at the table with Mart DeHaan, Bill Crowder, and Elisa Morgan for part 4 of our study of the miraculous life of Elisha. And in the next part of the conversation, we'll be introduced to a Syrian military leader. Now, since Syria and Israel were not, and in fact still today are not, on really good terms, how did this Syrian military commander cross paths with a Jewish prophet? We'll discover an astounding prophetic message that's part of this event in the miraculous life of Elisha after we take a short break. Now, Discover the Word is part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global Bible engagement ministry where we're on a mission to fuel Bible engagement for life around the world. In addition to our radio programs and podcasts, we also publish books, devotionals, and content for specific audiences. And one of my favorite aspects of this ministry is our online learning program. Artos Academy was formerly called Our Daily Bread University, and they have been providing accessible and affordable Christian learning worldwide for well over 20 years. Right now, they have over 260 courses that are accessed each month by more than 60,000 visitors from over 200 countries. Let me encourage you to browse through the kinds of courses that you could take, and I think you'll be excited about this too. We'll have a link to Artos Academy in our show notes, and you can also visit their website anytime directly by going to artosacademy.org. That's Artos, A-R-T-O-S, artosacademy.org. Now, I mentioned that there are show notes that go along with this part of our Discover the Word study on our discovertheword.org website. Our show notes include scriptures to read, questions to personalize the content, and additional resources that will help you to continue your study. The show notes are really a great, fairly new feature that we've added at discovertheword.org. Just click on View Episode and then scroll down until you get to our show notes. Well, an important ingredient in this next part of Elisha's miraculous life is one of the top health concerns of the people that lived during his day. Now, for them, it was as scary a disease as any on the list of communicable diseases and viruses and illnesses we fear today. Just a heads up, this series, The Miraculous Life of Elisha, was originally recorded almost 10 years ago, which, of course, then would have been before COVID. And so that's why they don't mention the thing that jumps front of mind for us when we get into a conversation like this.
Do you remember when the Ebola crisis just scared the world?
Oh, goodness, yes.
Were either of you traveling during that time? Were you on airplanes internationally?
I was traveling internationally during the bird flu thing a few years ago, and that was pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to feel so much for people who are living in those regions where they just daily, it's like they're afraid of making contact with one another. The reason I raise it is because in Israel, a long time ago, and as we read the Old Testament scriptures, leprosy had that kind of a reputation.
Yeah, it was like dead man walking. Once you were diagnosed with leprosy, you were expelled from the community. You had to live in isolation the rest of your life. You lost your family. You lost your home. You lost everything. It just,
yeah. There was like a double death. I mean, supposedly leprosy would kill you, but it would kill you long before it would kill you.
Yeah.
It'd kill you emotionally. Yeah.
It would isolate you from everything.
Right. Let's just look just at a couple of texts. Leviticus chapter 13. Elisa, would you look up Leviticus 13, verse 45?
Sure. Okay.
There's an indication of how leprosy was viewed under the law.
All right, here it is. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, let his hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." Wow, as if having it isn't bad enough.
Medical people will say, when it comes to diagnosing leprosy or describing what it actually is, it's conceivable that back then these concerns and these cautions may have been given for a number of skin diseases that were not necessarily what we think of as modern leprosy.
Yeah.
But it's nevertheless, if it's thought to be infectious and contagious, such a strong warning and even legal prohibitions.
Right, and in verse 46, as long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone. He must live outside the camp.
That's what Bill was saying before,
What's interesting about it is that in Jewish law, because leprosy had such spiritual implications, if you started to get a patch of dry skin, you didn't go to the doctor. You went to the priest. It was the priest who diagnosed you. And so there's a spiritual dimension to the isolation as well.
Yeah. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is that We've been talking about the miraculous life of Elisha and some of the ways in which he gave evidence that he was speaking in behalf of the one true God was the miracles that he did. And one of them has to do with leprosy. In 2 Kings chapter 5, it shows up in verses 1 through 6. Elisa, would you start, and then maybe at some point Bill pick up?
Okay.
Okay, here we go. The king of Aram, which is Syria, had a great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him, the Lord had given Aram great victories.
Okay, maybe we ought to stop there for a minute. Aram was the people of the region to the northeast of Israel in those times. And what do we know about the relationship between Aram, or what we would call Syria today, and Israel?
Well, because they were bordering countries, there were constant border raids.
Yeah.
The Syrians were constantly raiding Israel and taking captives and slaves and possessions and whatever they could get their hands on. So they were constantly kind of victimizing Israel.
Elisa, read that again, that first verse.
The king of Aram, Syria, had a great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him the Lord had given Aram great victories.
Now, great victories over
Israel.
It would have included Israel as well as maybe other people's, is right?
And the Lord's the one giving them to them. That's
Interesting.
ironic.
That is.
Okay, let's pick it up at that point.
But though Naaman was a mighty warrior, he had suffered from leprosy. That's odd, too.
Read that again.
But though Naaman was a mighty warrior, he suffered from leprosy.
Okay, so he was a mighty warrior. He was the commander of the army of the king of Aram,
giving victories,
that the Lord was enabling.
And he has leprosy. Do you think he runs around with torn clothes and his hair unkempt and
Absolutely
covering the
not.
lower part of his face and crying out, unclean, unclean?
No, what he's saying is, you better get out of my way because I'm coming.
Maybe we're going a little beyond the
Okay.
text, but no, in one sense it's tragic. The war is tragic. The leprosy for him, and I'm sure in his family, would have been a real problem. But it's just so unusual. Here's a war hero. He means so much to the king of Aram. The Lord is using him.
Why is he exempt from this law?
Well, because it's not the law of Syria.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
law of Israel, and they had different rules
Oh, thank you.
in Syria about how to deal with lepers. They still had full access to the community.
Okay.
Right. Bill, why don't you pick up reading at
Okay.
that point?
Verse 2, At this time, Aramean raiders had invaded the land of Israel, and among their captives was a young girl who had been given to Naaman's wife as a maid. One day the girl said to her mistress, I wish my master would go to see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy.
Now, wait a minute. Let's stop there. Seems like something strange is going on here. What just happened?
Well, this little girl who has been enslaved by Naaman is now showing mercy to Naaman.
Okay, so where did she come from?
She came from Israel.
So she worships the God of Israel.
So under what circumstances did she come from Israel?
She was captured.
Conquered, yeah.
In a raid.
Yeah.
So here's a Jewish girl, little girl. We don't probably know her age, but
Young
she's
girl.
young girl. She's living in the household of
Naaman.
Naaman, the commander of the army of Syria, who has leprosy. And what does she say?
She says, I wish that you would go see the prophet in Israel because she thinks he can heal him.
Why didn't she hate him?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here. One is what she could have said was, if you'll let me go home to my family, I'll tell you how you can get fixed.
Ooh, you think
There
maybe
you
she's
go.
playing this as a card.
Oh, she could have played
Could
it
have
as a
been.
card, but apparently she doesn't. And the other thing that I think about is, and I haven't checked this out, Mark, maybe you know, but when was the last time a leper was healed? Miriam is the only time I can find in
coming
the
out
Old
of the
Testament.
Exodus.
So what makes her think
That it's
that
actually gonna
Elisha can
happen.
heal him? Because there's no record of people being
No.
healed of this.
And yet Elisha has done some wild miracles.
That's
Yeah,
true.
he's raised from the dead. He's
Yeah.
multiplied food.
As his name means God saves.
Yeah, right. Okay. Elisa, why don't you pick it up at this point?
In verse 4, so Naaman told the king what the young girl from Israel had said. Go and visit the prophet, the king of Aram told him. I will send a letter of introduction for you to take to the king of Israel. So Naaman started out carrying as gifts 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter to the king of Israel said, With this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy.
Okay. How would you paraphrase, Bill, this event? How is this playing out right now?
Well, the way it's playing out is that he's found an advocate in the king of Syria who is now going to appeal.
Who's found?
Naaman, which shows again how respected he is, how highly he's regarded in spite of his leprosy. And now he goes to the king of Israel, which is a king that they've been terrorizing.
The enemy.
And he says, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of money and 10 new suits if you'll heal my guy. But it's not the king that can heal him. It's Elisha that the girl talked about. So you have this conversation between kings about a sick guy and a prophet who does crazy, strange things.
Okay.
That's not a good paraphrase, but that's all I got.
Oh, this is.
I
it's
wish everybody
interesting.
could see my face right now. I've got these big bug eyes
It's
going.
like, where is this going?
Wow.
Right? Does it impress you at all that this is so interesting? It's like an outside-in look from Syria back into Israel. And it shows that God has been working in the lives of this family, the patriarch of whom is the commander of the army of Syria. In his household is this young girl who knows that there's a prophet in Israel who could heal leprosy. That's what she believes.
And there are many times in Old Testament that Jewish people demonstrate a faith that can provide a solution to
Right.
people's problems. Daniel,
Right.
or, we could have lots of illustrations here of this.
And isn't it significant? It reminds us that from the beginning, God has chosen his people, not just for their own sake, but to spread his message throughout the neighboring nations. And here we show how the nation of Syria, from the king on down, is being affected by this rumor that there's a prophet in Israel who can cure leprosy. And this little girl is also evidence, it appears, of a little girl whose faith has enabled her to have concern, even for the man who's the head of the army that has stolen her from her family. The New Testament refers to Elisha one place. It's in Luke chapter 4, and it's verse 27. And Elisa, can you find that and just read it?
Yes, I'm happy to. I don't know if I've ever really seen this way. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian.
Yeah. Bill, who was
Wow.
speaking there?
Jesus,
And what was his point?
his point was that the people of God were not living a life of faith. We're not living a life of trusting in God. But when faith was expressed outside Israel, God would respond. God would move in. And just as he did for Naaman the Syrian, so he's done in generations since,
Right.
reaching beyond with the message that was birthed in Israel, but it's really for the whole world.
That's right.
Yeah, this really is a pretty amazing story that we'll spend the rest of this episode and then the beginning of part 5 exploring together. And it's just one of the many examples that demonstrate how God's redemptive message may have been birthed through one nation, but it wasn't just for them. This rescue is for the whole world. Now, in the next segment, we're going to see the effect that the faith and courage of a young Jewish slave girl has on this part of the story. There's an important lesson to be learned as we move forward in another incredible event in the miraculous life of Elisha.
I don't suppose this has ever happened to you, but it's happened to me. Something has happened, and I got all upset. And I thought I knew where it was going, and I spent quite a bit of wasted energy worrying about it. And in retrospect, I realized, oh man, I wasted so much time worrying about
Something that never happened.
never happened. That's never happened to you, I'm sure.
A few years ago, we had some financial stuff that was going on, but at the same time, we had a car breakdown that we had to replace, and so we went to the bank to see if we could get a loan for a car. And I fretted and sweated and everything else as to whether or not we were going to get approved for a loan. And then when I went to the bank, he said, oh yeah, this was a piece of cake, no problem.
That's a great illustration. And on the other hand, in our family, we have been through a long season of really difficult circumstances, things happening to our kids making certain choices, so that my husband, Evan, and I, now when the phone rings at a weird hour or when someone we pick up and it's a child, we have this trigger reaction of, oh, what is it? Now it's usually nothing. So I really hear what you're saying. It's either by conditioning or by letting our mind go to the worst case scenario. We often freak into anxiety
Right. And I appreciate what
unnecessarily.
you're saying because we don't want to make light of it. I mean, there are matters in life that are of great concern and very weighty. But so often, we look back and we find out that some of the things that we got all upset about,
Didn't happen.
it didn't happen the way we thought they were going to be. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is because we've been looking at the miraculous life of Elisha and some of the events of his life. And we come today to his relationship with the Syrians of his day. He was an Israelite. He was a Jewish man, Jewish prophet. And he has some interactions with the king of Syria and with the general commander of his army. Something happens, and there's a very emotional reaction that I want us to weigh together. But first, let's just set up what happened that we talked about yesterday. Where are we in the story? Do you remember?
Well, this general that you mentioned, this Syrian general Naaman.
His name is
His
Naaman.
name, we're Naaman here. And he's highly respected, highly regarded by the king and apparently by the people
Of
Of
Syria.
Of Syria,
which is
yeah.
in the passage called Aram.
Aram.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's probably not too highly regarded by the people of Israel and the surrounding countries
Why
because he's
not?
been successful in raiding across borders and in winning battles against people like the Israelites, of which Elisha is a part.
Okay, and Elisa, what's unusual about this general?
He's very successful, but he has leprosy.
Yeah.
And in Israel, there were rules about leprosy. Like you had to wear torn clothes and you had to have unkempt hair and you had to cover the lower part of your face and you had to cry out as you walked the streets, unclean, unclean, and you couldn't live with everybody else. You had to be isolated in a camp. So it was a big disease. In Aram or Syria, there were different rules, evidently, and he could have a normal life, except that he was ill.
And Bill, how does this begin to turn this story?
Well, in one of the raids across Israel's border, a little girl is taken captive and
From Israel.
from Israel, and oh, what a coincidence, she happens to end up in Naaman's house as a maid servant to Naaman's wife. And as she sees Naaman apparently struggling with this disease, she says to her mistress, I just wish he would go see the prophet in Israel. He could heal him. And I think that's really interesting that in Israel at that time, they were in a state of unbelief, which was why they were having famines and prophets like Elijah and Elisha. And so I find it so fascinating that the little girl that would get captured and would be taken to the house of someone who needed to hear that there was a man of God who could maybe help is this one little girl who apparently does have faith that God can do stuff. It's just amazing to see how God works in the details.
And her faith is going someplace. So
Yeah.
let's pick up the reading and let's actually go back and read a couple of verses. Let's start, Elisa, with verse 4 of 2 Kings chapter 5, all right?
Okay. So Naaman told the king, the king of Aram, Syria, what the young girl from Israel had said. Go and visit the prophet, the king of Aram told him. I will send a letter of introduction for you to take to the king of Israel. Interesting, these two kings are feuding. Okay. So Naaman started out carrying as gifts 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. And then in verse 6, the letter to the king of Israel said, with this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy.
And what's interesting is there's a missing piece of information, isn't there? Because the little girl tells the mistress there's a prophet in Israel, and Naaman tells the king what the little girl said, but what the king communicates to the other king doesn't even mention the prophet. It's just, I want you to heal him.
Okay. All right, great. Let's pick up the reading at that point. Bill, would you do that?
Okay. Verse 7 of 2 Kings 5. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, this man sends me a leper to heal? Am I God that I can give life and take it away? I can see that he's just trying to pick a fight with me. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent this message to him. Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger out to him with this message. Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy.
Okay, there's a lot here, isn't there? This is an interesting story.
It is.
Oh, it is.
It is.
It's fascinating.
The panic
Yeah,
that
the
sets
panic
in.
that
Yeah.
set in when the king of Israel read this letter.
You got to realize, too, as we've read this story and looked at it in a couple of conversations, the Lord had given the victories to Syria. And, it says that in the passage in an earlier verse. But it feels to me like the king of Israel is so on edge, so on edge to have a letter from his enemy come in and feeling the pressure of, I've got to be the one to heal here.
Well, but again, as he's looking at it, he suffered defeat after defeat after defeat, loss after loss after loss, and it's almost like now he's just looking for an excuse to come after us again. And I think the anxiety is, how many more of these defeats can we take?
Right.
How much more of this can we
And
handle?
honestly, we've talked about this as well. I mean, you're bringing leprosy into my own palace here?
Yeah, we've got to bring the mindset of a Jewish king
Unclean.
into the picture. Yeah.
Unclean.
Right. Is there irony of faith in this interaction?
Well, apparently Naaman has enough faith that he makes the journey from Syria to Samaria to talk to the king about the possibility of getting healed.
And the king of Syria writes a letter that
he believes there's something that can be done about it.
And apparently there's a little girl.
Who believes there's something. But the king
but
of
she's
Israel,
been taken.
She's been taken, but apparently she has enough faith. And the king of Israel, maybe doesn't.
And again, what he could have said is, this man sent me a leper to heal, but there is a God in Israel who is able. But he doesn't. He said, am I God?
Yeah.
I so relate to that. A problem comes into my life and I think, I've got to fix this. I just start panicking. It's up to me. And I forget, I serve God. He can fix stuff I can't fix. Elisa, wait. Just because it's in front of you doesn't mean you have to fix it.
Yeah. That's if you know a God who you believe is big enough and real enough to do something in your life, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And isn't that what this story is really all about?
Yeah. Because Syria is a pagan nation where faith is starting to take root. Israel is the people of God where the ground has gone hardened.
Yeah. But their influence, nevertheless, has gone out.
Yeah.
There is a prophet of the one true God in Israel, Elisha, and the little girl.
If you're Elisha, wouldn't you feel like maybe I ought to just move to Syria? At least there's some open hearts there.
Elisa, look to the New Testament real quick. There's one place in the New Testament, just one place that mentions Elisha. It's in Luke chapter 4 and verse 27.
And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed. Only Naaman the Syrian.
Okay, we'll look at the miracle in our next conversation. But up until now, we know what Jesus was saying. The God of Israel is not just the God of Israel. And oftentimes, he finds openness of heart. He finds a willingness to trust in those who have had the message and who have ignored it. I think this is a message we need to hold to ourselves today. If we've been on the inside, if we've been a part of the church all of our lives, we need to ask ourselves, are we really people of faith? Are we still really believing? Are we really trusting him in the tough issues of our life when we're scared out of our wits, even though we don't know what's going to happen? And if we're not a part of the church, if we're on the outside, if we haven't entered the door of a sanctuary in years, think in terms of the king of Syria and of Naaman. And this is a big God. This is a God who reaches across borders, who reaches across streets and cities to find people like us who are ready and willing to trust him.
Yeah, it really does all come down to who we trust. We're talking about the miraculous life of Elisha and how through Elisha, God healed Naaman, a Syrian, of leprosy. As we've said, Syria and Israel are not on the best of terms today, and they really were not either back in the time of Elisha. And so let's wrap up this episode of the podcast by continuing to look at this improbable scenario, the healing of a Syrian military commander through a Jewish prophet. And Mart gets this part of the conversation underway with kind of a strange and random sounding question, but as you'll see, it does have relevance to this part of our study.
Bill, when you were 12 years old, did you like doing magic tricks, card tricks?
I remember being fascinated watching people do them, but I never thought I could pull it off, so I didn't try.
Didn't you?
I remember just being fascinated watching people do card tricks and stuff.
And my oldest grandson adores card tricks.
Does he really?
Oh, he practices them on YouTube, and he does them amazingly for us.
Wow.
I'm very impressed. Yeah.
I've still got the little kid in me.
Do you?
I'm not good,
Uh-huh.
but there's certain little tricks that you pick up along the way. I'm delighted when I can pull them off.
Isn't that, we
Yeah.
should get you guys together. You'd probably share great tricks.
I would sit at his feet, I know.
That's awesome.
But anyway, it's interesting how many, I think, little kids, maybe especially little boys, really get into magic. Reason I wanted to talk about it is because magic, while it's cute and fun with little boys, becomes a real problem when it becomes a part of our religious.
Like a rabbit's foot or something.
Yeah, like we can manipulate things or we can make things happen. And when it becomes a serious issue and it becomes almost a religious expression is when people attempt to control God.
To even usurp God's role and be God.
And sometimes even try to give the impression that we can bless others or we can give the favor of God to others. It can become a real problem. It shows up in the story we've been looking at, one of these miraculous moments in the prophet Elisha's life. Actually, we've taken a couple of conversations already to talk about the healing of a leper, a Syrian leper by the name of Naaman. I've enjoyed the way you guys have engaged with me in the story, and I wish you would just work together to lead us up to where we are today. The setting is the nation of Israel in like the 9th century before Christ. The nation has wandered from its God. These are a chosen people, but they've become faithless. And they've actually gone after the gods of the lands. And now God is calling them back to himself, first through the prophet by the name of Elijah, and then a prophet by the name of Elisha. And both of these men have been given the ability to work miracles, to give evidence that their message is in behalf of the one true God. Okay? Now, when we come to Naaman, Bill, where does the story start?
Well, not only is God calling his people back through the prophets, he's also calling them back through some discipline.
Yeah.
And some of this discipline has to do with the fact that God has given the Syrian armies victories over his own people, the Israelites.
The Syrians were north of Israel, and you're right, they were aggressive and cruel.
And in this passage, the country's called Aram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they've been raiding the borders and taking captives, and the primary military leader, it seems like, is this gentleman named Naaman, highly respected by the king of Syria, but also a leper.
Right, which is very odd. Here's a man with leprosy. And in Israel, if you had leprosy, you had to go through separation from society. Things like ripping your clothes and having unkempt hair and shouting out unclean and living in a camp outside of other people. But in Aram, Syria, it evidently was okay to have leprosy.
There wasn't a social taboo at all.
Okay, and what happens?
In one of the border raids into Israel, Syrians capture a little girl, apparently one of the few who had faith still in the God of
A
Israel.
little Jewish girl.
A little Jewish girl. She becomes the maidservant to Naaman's wife, and observing Naaman's leprosy says if he could just get to the prophet of Israel, Naaman could be healed of his leprosy.
That indicates that this little housemaid senses that there's great pain, there's great distress in that home. If only this could be healed. And she knows the prophet in Israel, back home,
Right.
across the border, who she believes would
It's like
help.
if you had a helper in your home and they struggled with a bad knee and you think, oh, we could just get that knee replacement for this person.
Yeah, it's amazing she didn't want to kill him, but there's something was happening in her heart. And looking back, we have to assume that God was reaching down into this little girl's heart.
And I think
doing
she's the real
something.
hero of the story in many ways because of the mercy she shows to her captors.
Yeah.
Wonderful picture of grace. So they tell Naaman about the prophet. Naaman goes to the Syrian king, who sends letter and gifts to the Israelite king saying, this is my servant, I want him healed. And we saw in our last conversation,
The Israel king just freaks out thinking, I can't heal him. I don't have that kind of miraculous power.
He actually says, who do you think I am? God? I can't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
And
that's
then
really
Elisha steps in.
yeah,
Okay, let's pick up the story and read it then, okay?
yeah, good.
And Elisa, would you begin? And where should we start? With verse maybe 8?
Okay, so this is 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 8. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, again thinking, who do you think I am? He sent this message to him. Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger out to him with this message: Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and then your skin will be restored, and you'll be healed of your leprosy.
Okay, let's make sure we don't miss. How did Elisha get involved in this now? The message had gone to the king of Israel.
Yeah. And apparently the king did not send word to Elisha, but he got word of mouth. He heard it through the grapevine, and he gets involved.
He steps up.
He steps up and says, send him to me, and he will learn that there's a true prophet in Israel.
Okay.
Now, what I think is very ironic about it, Mart, is if you compare verse 8 with verse 10, Elisha says, send him to me. But when Naaman comes to him, it's not Elisha that goes to him. He sends a messenger. He says, send him to me, but then he doesn't do anything personally. He sends somebody else to do something.
He sends a messenger out, but with his words.
Yeah, with his words.
Go and
but
wash yourself.
Elisha says, send him to me, but then he doesn't interact with him personally.
Okay, and how did Naaman respond?
He was ticked. In verse 11, should we pick that back up?
Yeah.
But Naaman became angry and stalked away. I thought he would certainly come out to meet me, he said. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me.
Okay. What's going on there?
I think there's some ego here, and anytime we're going to receive, we need to have a certain amount of humility in order to receive from someone else. And what we're seeing is kind of the opposite of humility from Naaman.
It's interesting, too, that maybe Elisha, in not going himself, was giving Naaman one more opportunity to personally understand who God was. You go to the river, you wash. It's not going to be an abracadabra, I fix you. I'm inviting you to make a personal investment. Who do you think God is? And maybe that's part of what this was about. We don't know. But maybe there is this participation that Elisha was inviting Naaman into.
And you wonder what he's heard beyond what that little girl told him about the prophet of Israel. Maybe he's picked up other stories along the way about some of the other miracles, and so he thinks, wow,
well,
who knows?
That's a familiar tale in the New Testament when people followed after Jesus, wanting to see the miracles, wanting to see the miraculous signs.
Right. And Elisha had done some, the rumors, we don't know how far the rumors got, but think in terms of the time that the waters were bad and he told the people to throw some salt in it. Another time when there were some prophets, sons of the prophets that Elisha was mentoring, and during a time of famine, they went out and one of them collected food. He dug up some gourds out of the field and he brought it back for a pot of stew. He didn't realize he threw something that was poison into the stew. And so remember what Elisha had said, put some flour into it.
It's fine now.
Yeah. And as we tried to just work with those stories, we felt we could see there were spiritual implications. It wasn't simply a matter of magic, and it was directly related to the Lord God of Israel. So you just kind of wonder whether or not Elisha wanted to make sure that Naaman knew that the one who healed him was the Lord. Because it'd be very easy to associate the powers with Elisha.
Yeah, and coming from a pagan background, who knows what the frame of reference is that Naaman's coming into this thing with, but it's not likely that he's got a well-informed understanding of the God of Israel.
Right.
So I think you're making a good point.
Let's go on and see then what happened. How did this turn out?
So picking it up in verse 13.
Yeah, but his officers tried to reason with him and said, Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he simply says, Go and wash and be cured. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River, dipped himself 7 times as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel.
So here now, a Syrian by the name of Naaman. In one sentence, he explains to us what the miracles of Elisha and Elijah before him are all about, so that the nation of Israel and their neighbors would know that there is one true God, and that God is for the world.
Yeah, that is the why of the miraculous life of Elisha. And it makes sense that it was a Syrian, non-Jewish person who would make that statement. God is for the whole world. Well, great to have you along for another installment in our ongoing series about this prophet that lived in Israel 800 or so years before Christ. That was part 4 of what will take us 7 episodes to finish off our look at the miraculous life of Elisha. And so in part 5, we will finish off the Naaman chapter of this saga. There's still some twists in this Syrian-Israeli interaction, as you might expect. And then we'll get into another of the stranger miracles mentioned in 2 Kings, the miracle of the floating axe head. That'll be a memorable one, too, in the miraculous life of Elisha, with us here on Discover the Word, with Mart DeHaan, Elisa Morgan, and Bill Crowder. Discover the Word is a small group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in which we invite you to walk with us through topics and passages that inform the way we read the Scriptures, challenge us as we live our lives as followers of Christ, and always point us to discover Jesus in the pages of the Bible. And just so you know, it is the generous support of listeners like you that makes it possible for us to provide resources like Artos Academy, our online learning program that I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Discover the Word, the Our Daily Bread devotional, and so much more to people all around the world. For example, in addition to Discover the Word being available on all the major streaming services, it also airs internationally on radio, including in Canada, the UK, Fiji Islands, Australia, and across the U.S. Learn more about how you can partner with us financially at discovertheword.org. That's discovertheword.org. Click the Donate button that's up at the top of the page. Thanks. And thanks for listening. I'm Brian Hettinga. Discover the Word is provided by